And thank you again, everyone, for being here. I really appreciate it. It's a really special story and it's a privilege to be able to share it. And yes, just to echo that, I love questions, so please keep them coming. This particular story I came across 5 years ago in a day job where I was doing some heritage research, and one particular local history story stuck out in my mind. And in the research of other people's, or in the pages of other people's writing, there were these hints towards there being more to this story. And that's the thing with queer history. Before 1984, a lot of you would be aware, in New South Wales, it was illegal to be engaged in consensual sex with another man. And so as a result of that, historically, a lot of the materials we have around queer people is often very much the bleak parts of their life. It was often hidden, it was often omitted. We find court papers, we find papers about hangings and prosecution and imprisonment, but not a lot of evidence and history about the lovely moments of queer people's lives, because it wasn't safe to keep those moments. It was important to hide them for people's well-being. And so that makes life really interesting for us as queer historians, and it makes piecing together a story like this really difficult, but also really exciting. So in those little bits of research I was coming across about a young, I'm going to step back a little bit and say, out of respect to the families of one of the gentlemen, I on purpose don't name these soldiers. In my personal opinion, it's absolutely extremely unlikely that they weren't in some sort of intimate relationship. They absolutely had a very special relationship. The exact nature of that we'll never absolutely know, but out of respect to one of the families, I just refer to them as the young pilot and the older gentleman. So when I was researching this young pilot, it was very clear in the writing of lots of people that there was something more to this. And when I spoke to the other people who'd all researched, they all had the same hunches I had. They all had the same suspicions. They all searched for the same information and the same proof that I did. And none of them, being historians, ever found that smoking gun or that silver bullet that could absolutely prove it enough that they could say unequivocally that the nature of this relationship. But for me, being an artist, I am allowed to occupy that space. I am allowed to put on my speculative hat and say, what if? And that's one of the glorious things about working in this space as an artist, as opposed to being a historian. So yes, as Louise mentioned, I came across this story 5 years ago. I let it sit for 2 years, and then I got really obsessed with it and I researched it like all hell. I've worked with the Australian War Memorials Research Department, with local studies departments in the eastern suburbs, and also the researchers who've worked with this piece previously. I've tracked down diaries, or at least segments of diaries, between the pair and just tried to piece together this story. So starting with the things we do know before I talk about the things I added to the story, what we do know is that in 1920, a young man was born in Bondi. That young man grew up to become the person I refer to as the young pilot. He grew up in the eastern suburbs. He wasn't necessarily a great scholar. We've got his school reports. He didn't pass many things. He wasn't good at math, so the fact that he ended up becoming a pilot is incredible when you think about the training he had to do to become a pilot. But what we do have are some accounts of him being very good with a BB gun and shooting rats, and fishing, and also participating in the activities of Tamarama Surf Lifesaving Club. When he's about 15, an older gentleman who's originally from South Africa but is based out of England and now a baron, had been moving a lot between Australia and England, and in a very short space of time they meet, and it's not clear how they meet. It's not clear what the nature of that relationship was. And we also can't find any link between him and the young boy's father, who both the young boy's father and the older gentleman served in World War I. But whatever happened at that meeting, very shortly after they meet, the pair end up on a boat back to England. And the older gentleman takes guardianship of the younger gentleman. There's a 44-year age difference between the pair. And in the following months in England, a very loving relationship is documented between the pair, where the older gentleman is taking him to lots of fancy social events, is showering him in lavish clothes, buying him a motorbike, discussing a future together, and also discussing giving his nana which is a real house, Melbourne Manor, to the young boy, and the young boy is discussing taking on the older gentleman's name. So there's a lot of really interesting things about this dynamic. It could have just been a typical guardianship, but there's a few moments that suggest there's more to it. The young boy also basically says, I want to be a pilot, and it's really an interesting time for aeronautical history because the Spitfire, this plane, is new, World War II is booming, the rise of fascism is creeping out across Europe, and he's in one of the first sort of groups to be trained as a Spitfire pilot, and he doesn't do well at his studies to become a pilot, but what he does document in his diary is being supported by the older man to get across the line and to achieve his new dreams of becoming a pilot. What does happen later is war breaks out. He eventually is in the air defending Britain in a Spitfire in Squadron 152. He is noted as being quite a great and capable pilot. He takes out at least 13 Germans in a very short amount of time, and taking out his 14th German, he gets a bit cocky. He doesn't follow training and kind of celebrates for a moment, and in that time he's shot. And either he dies on impact or dies on the ground. There's conflicting reports about that. And then once he does die is where this story becomes even more beautiful and complicated, because the older gentleman, instead of returning his ashes to his mother, holds on to them for the next 23 years and is buried with them when he's buried in South Africa. He also embarks on making sure the young boy's legacy is known and erects multiple monuments in the boy's name. But when he does erect those monuments, he gives the boy his own surname. So there's a lot of sort of loving, beautiful gestures between the two that carry suggestions over time that there was something going on here. Any questions about the nature of that relationship before I move on? Yes. In terms of artistic license, one of the things I try and do in my practice is noting that this history is often defined by the bleak. It's often in this history we define same-sex individuals of the past by the worst moments of their life, because that's all we have records of. My work really tries to find and give light back into those narratives. So it's really focused on the everyday, the domestic, the romantic, the normalcy that history books don't, the warmth that history books don't hold on to. So things like the pair going to the Bronte Cinema and having a canoodle in the back row, very unlikely that would have happened, but I kind of want to gift them that magic moment of a first date. The idea that they would get off a boat and have a photo like any other couple travelling at this period in time, very unlikely that they would have had a couple photographed like this. Images like this are extremely rare, but again, I wanted to gift them that because that's what this whole project is kind of about. It's about honouring the queer people of the past and giving them the experiences and the joy that they might not have been able to have. The other aspect of photographs of the past, one of my big reference points through the project is this wonderful collection called Loving by a couple of American collectors who basically have been sourcing historic images of gay men together for a long time, and it's a huge, beautiful collection. But moments like this, photographs like this are very rare, and they were actually very dangerous to have. And so this other body of work over here that complements the show is basically trying to simulate or give the couple back some of these types of lovely moments. And you see in these photos, sometimes they're very stiff and sterile, and sometimes there's just that slight suggestion of something more, like a hand brushing up against a leg, and sometimes it's full-blown, quite clear that they were some sort of partnership. In terms of process, I hope everyone's had a chance to watch the animation in the video. We'll put the sound up on it when we finish the talk. The soundtrack's a very important part to the piece as well. These pieces are hand-drawn animations. So this piece has over 3,000 stills in it. To create it, there's a piece of paper on a wall, there's a camera in front of it, and I'm literally pacing backwards and forwards, making a mark, take a photo, rub it out, change it, take another photo, and I do that 3,000 times. And then a film appears. A lot of the pieces also have a watercolour base, and I did make a conscious move into watercolour with this piece because of the historical nature of it. The process of animating is kind of like etching something back into existence for me. There's something about the ritual of that is declaring this thing back into life, breathing this thing back into life. Giving it life to animate is to breathe life by its original definition. But it's also just taking the time to observe it and really take the time to go through that ritual as a credit to the original subject matter, or an ode to the original subject matter, if that makes sense. Any questions? I feel like I've wound me up and off I've gone. Yeah, please.
One question, just in regards to the timeline, and you seem the credit for being an artist, and you seem to go for the dead all the way through their lives. In regards to drawing the works, do you go through it chronologically, or are you jumping back and forth through the lives when you create the work?
That's a great question. So I hate chronology, and this is where this is where me being an artist rather than a historian is really liberating. I like map out the life, but then I will start going, what's an interesting moment, or what's an interesting image, and how can I push and pull and play with that? So even the storyboard happens in reverse. I kind of piece it together through the making process, and at the end it kind of crystallizes when I go, okay, I've got this chunk of a narrative and this, how do I weave them together? So if I work A to B, then I know where it's going and I get bored, and therefore I think my audience are going to get bored as well. So it's very much a very erratic process, but also very slow because it takes months and months. Yeah.
And a follow-up question, what's going on in your, say, personal life? Does that influence the way that you live your lives in the story?
Oh, what a question. Not with this one, but with other pieces, yes. This one, I mean, my personal life is actually, touch wood, very stable at the moment. And I have a very lovely and supportive partner who is the bugle player in the soundtrack, is Riley, my partner. And maybe because this piece is also about stability and focusing on the loveliness, maybe that also means yes. That's a really great question. I think I need to think lots more about that. Yeah. So this soundtrack, Paul Smith is the composer. So the reason that's an interesting question is my partner is a composer, conductor, and performer, and he doesn't compose all my soundtracks yet. And there's Paul, who I've been working with for years, really is quite good at queering the soundtrack. So Riley makes really beautiful soundtracks, and I actually don't want really beautiful soundtracks. His strength is orchestral pieces. He writes full orchestral compositions, whereas his types of compositions I kind of want to break for my type of work. So he didn't compose this one. He's composed some other ones. Paul Smith, who has a master's in animation and composition for animation, and is also a same-sex attracted man, did the soundtrack to this one. But my partner is also a bugler for, like, you would have heard him at some sort of Anzac Day function around Sydney at some point. So it was kind of a very lovely meeting of those two people to bring together that soundtrack. Yeah, it was a really complicated piece because, I personally have no doubt that there's more to this story. And I did take it in a really romantic Disney angle, which I always do. And I'm very much about giving that really loveliness back to the past. But there's also a dynamic where, as with a 44-year-old age difference, and with what we know of other things that went on at the time, there could be just, it could have just been a really lovely guardianship. Let's just be really clear about that. There is a chance where all my speculation is completely wrong. There could also be the nature whereby we see lots of older, in status, in power, wealthy gentlemen having their younger companion, and because they were of power and status, no one would question it. There could be that type of dynamic to it too. The young boy, his father was also in World War I mentioned that. He was suffering from severe PTSD, rampant alcoholism, and his mum was really struggling to hold the house together. So there's a narrative where it was a very easy it was a very vulnerable person who was very easy to take and manipulate or use in whatever direction he wanted to. But that all comes with our contemporary understanding of pedestry as well, which back in 1920, things were very different. All of this was very different. So it's very hard to sort of interpret and put our contemporary ideas onto it without enough evidence to really know what was really going on. Yeah.
It's interesting from a historical standing versus a contemporary morality view.
Totally.
Both are challenging
Yeah.
for the family in a way.
Totally, absolutely, yeah. And did I mention his girlfriends either? No. So he may have also been. There's another angle, which is he may have also been what we in contemporary terms would call a bisexual. In his diary, he did get engaged to a woman, and then very quickly slept with many other people. He was 20, and he was also very much confronted with his mortality because he was going to fight the Germans every day. So a really interesting dynamic there. But the way he writes about his girlfriend and then his fiance and then the 5 or 6 other people that he engages in relationships with, there's nowhere near the amount of warmth or care or tenderness as how he describes the older gentleman. So that dynamic as well was really interesting to unpack and play with. And it was quite upsetting coming across that chunk of his diary where for so long it was so clear he was into, and then suddenly he's talking about his girlfriend, but also just very sterile in how he talks about her. But the other little bits of interesting evidence around that is there are 2 other pilots in the same time frame who do really interesting things in their diary and their writings. One of them, we now know in his diary, there's a codec, and basically when he's writing about Maisie, he's actually talking about Matthew. So he was very aware and very much censoring his own document because of all the reasons I spoke about criminal homosexuality. And the other one is, what's his name? Glick, who's in the 86th Squadron. And when he released his public memoir, his family were just laughing outrageously, and this was all documented and even on BBC morning television, because they knew their uncle as this flamboyant camp gay man, and suddenly in his memoir he's talking about his wartime wife who didn't exist. But for him to get his memoirs published, he put that in on purpose so that the story was more palatable. So it's really interesting how we deal with this historical information and how even our primary materials can very much be heavily edited and censored. So those moments gave me a little bit more wiggle room in terms of interpreting that diary. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you.
Todd,
yes.
do you mind speaking just a little bit about your models? Because I know you have an amazing relationship with them, which really kind of helps build the work.
Yeah, a great prompt. Thank you, Lois. So in terms of the process of putting together these pieces, early on I do a session where I basically try and find some models who look like the people I'm interested in. And so in this case, I worked with Jerome and Felix, and we did this big session where they came and they dressed up, they brought different outfits, and I would give them provocations like, I want you to be studying and I want you to help him. Now let's try that again, and I want you to put this into it. I want you to give an offering to each other. We basically play theatre games where I give scenarios and we film it, and I sit there drawing as they do it. And that reference material really helps inform the moments that I have to piece together around these stories. So the actors bring a lot to these pieces, and getting those right actors in the room is a really crucial part to stimulating the reference material with which I can pull together an animation. And those lovely gentlemen came and dressed up on Thursday night, which was very cute. And they didn't tell me they were dressing up. They just rocked up in long coats and old suits, which was really cute. And one of those models is going to be, we've got a life drawing session, apologies I'm mentioning it even though it's booked out, on Thursday, where one of them is going to be modelling so we can talk about that relationship, and he'll be modelling while we teach life drawing in the space, which will be very cool and fun on Thursday. Yeah.
Could you talk about the works that you've chosen to introduce colour into? I feel like there are a couple of them like punctuated with blue and red. I'm just interested in that choice.
Yeah, thank you. So this work has a palette of I call it old brown, but it's sepia. But basically it's a suggestion of time, and then it's red, white and blue, which is the Union Jack. So that's a reference to war and, you know, the flag everyone was fighting under, etc. So really that's the palette. But in terms of moving it around, the red tends to be obviously about death and the bleakness, the bad stuff. I use it for the young pilot's actual face is in that first one.
Just underneath their date.
Underneath the date is his death. So it's kind of like, oh, we didn't think maybe that. This is one of those moments where if I was a bad curator, I'd claim we intended that from the start. But we didn't make that connection. That is a lovely start and finish to the story there.
And then it's right opposite Last Kiss as well. So
Yeah.
I was like, okay, this is a...
Nice.
Yeah.
Love it when that happens. That's great. Yeah, so that's the extent. In terms of colour, I'm actually colourblind, and so I use colour really precisely, and I don't always, when I do deviate too much from the colours that I am really comfortable with, I tend to find people, I think they're great, but people who see colour differently to me will sometimes be like, oh. So my colour and my use of colour is very limited palette and very intentional but very restrained. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? No. Well, if you do have more, feel free to, I'll be hanging out afterwards. Feel free to come and have a chat. And thanks again for coming. Cool. And I might say thank you to Gordon for organising for Gay Art Group to be here as well. Appreciate it. Cheers.